because in Sweden, as a country with very high income, there is not much incentives to refurbish, for example, electronics, because the salaries of people are already so high, it's cheaper just to either export and buy something new. And then at some points, it is comes in the incentive to start developing supportive policies, which then would more nudge the system towards reuse and repair business models, which we are seeing right now in the European Union with new legislations coming in. So about a few best practice examples. It is gaining more traction currently in Europe. We have quite interesting examples in many different sectors, from consumer electronics to furniture, fashion. We have more people trying to repair the things they have. And we have also seen that governments are trying to nudge the development of circular economy by implementing circular public procurement. So now to a few examples. One of my favorite example is a product called Fairphone, this is a company from the Netherlands, and they have designed a mobile phone which is modular already by design, and different components of this phone can be replaced if they fail for some reason. Also, their products are made from recycled materials, and it is already very easy to repair if it's needed. And we can see by this product that it is designed for disassembly already in the beginning stage. So it's very important that we have also the designers and product developers who understand the need for this type of design mode. Stella Sonleist is a brand which produces high quality purses and bags. This is developed in Estonia. And in their products, they're using only very high quality materials, which ensures that the product itself could be used for a prolonged time. At the design stage, their products are also designed for disassembly, and they're designed for repairability. They provide to their clients refurbishments, redesign, and also maintenance services. So as long as possible, they're going to repair the already available product. And at the end of the lifetime for the client, the person is not interested in this product anymore, then it will be bought back by the brands, and they will design new products out of it. And this way they'll prolong the initial material which was used, they'll prolong its life cycle for as long as possible. And we have a lot of new repair cafes and also repair buses that are organized all over around Europe. And they're popping up especially a lot in Western Europe. What Ellen MacArthur Foundation says that we have more than 1,000 different repair cafes in the Western Europe. And it is very needed because many people nowadays don't even have the all needed tools to repair the appliances they have at their homes, and also they don't have the needed skills. So therefore, the repair cafes and repair buses is something that is going to support the kind of movement. And we have also different initiatives like Restart Project, which helps people to learn how to repair their things and rethink how they consume their things that they're purchasing. And that is achieved by organized repair events, knowledge transfer, education, and also bringing all this knowledge to the schools to educate also kids how to consume. And as I mentioned before, a very important part is, of course, a push that would come from a governmental level. Innovative circular public procurement is a very, very important part that can actually nudge the development and the development of circular economy. So Dutch government, they decided to make this approach. They wanted to purchase new furniture for their offices around the Netherlands. So what they did is they organized one procurement for all the governmental offices they had, And in the procurement, they wrote that it is very important that the new items are repaired, refurbished, recycled as much as possible, not to buy new things. And from this kind of governmental push, they actually created a system where this kind of services was needed. So there were many businesses could start to develop their products in this way, or to refurbish or remanufacture the available furniture they had. So there are many enabling factors for a circular economy. So we need to have the technological development that would support it. We need to have, from one side, demand for the circular products, for example, from the circular public procurement or from the consumer level. On the other hand, we need to have the knowledge, the know-how, and the circular design skills that would enable to produce these types of products. And we need to have business models that would base their businesses on these types of services and products. And that all should be supported by policy framework. And there is a need for effective policies that could drive a more circular economy. And these policies need to address the whole life cycle of the product, from the consumption to the use of the products. The policies need to support the reuse, repair, and remanufacturing, as well as provide all the needed product information and support public procurement. And when we are talking about the repair economy, we cannot not talk also about the right to repair, because many items that we have currently actually either they're not repairable at all, or there's very difficult for a consumer to repair them. So that's why European Union is currently now working on legislation which would make its the availability of the information, of the repairability of different items available for everybody who wants access to the information and to repair the items they have. And this is all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christina. As you rightly pointed out, circular economy represents a much needed systemic change, and we need to change how we consume, how we produce, how we design products, and especially what to do with them at the end of their life cycles. You spoke about circular design and how it doesn't always happen. The need for products to be designed for repair right at the production stage is so important. And thank you for those brilliant examples that you gave in Europe, and there are all kinds of repair cafes and restart projects, which are training consumers to help extend the life of the products by teaching them repair. And of course, at the very end, the political will is so important, and policies need to be focused on reuse, repair, and remanufacturing to address the whole life cycle of the product. Thank you so much. I would like to invite our second panelist, Bharti Chaturvedi. Bharti is a writer and environmentalist who has spent more than 20 years innovatively and passionately keeping issues of poverty and environment in the limelight in India and globally. She's worked with a range of organizations before founding the nonprofit Chintan with the object of changing the ground reality of the most ignored, stigmatized, yet critical green issue, urban consumption and waste, with a focus on the highly marginalized poor waste pickers. Bharti is the recipient of the prestigious 2009 Johns Hopkins Alumni Knowledge for the World Award. I would like to now invite Bharti to present us with a model of the repair economy for India. Over to you, Bharti. Bharti, you are on mute.
I've unmuted myself. Apologies for that. Well, thank you, Chitra. Thank you very much. And thank you, Christina. It was fabulous to listen to your presentation. So I wanted to basically dwell on the repair economy. What could that mean for India? And honestly, it almost sounds like an unreal proposition to talk about the repair economy in India. But, these are, unreal times, or rather differently real times. So I guess we should just deep dive into, the issue. I think the reason I believe that it almost feels unreal is because repair has really been, and it continues to be, part of our lifestyle, our reality in India. And it's so deeply embedded in our homes, in the way that we live, in our neighborhoods, in our localities, that we don't even have a terminology for it. So, for example, we don't have something called a remakery, formally, or repair cafes, because those skills lie embedded with large numbers of informal poor across both rural and urban India. I mean, last October, exactly a year ago, we were in a remote part of beyond Ranikhet, several hours away from Ranikhet. It took 3.5 hours, and there was this village, and there we had a repair shop, and Ranikhet is this place in the mountains, for those who don't know. And we have hundreds and hundreds of, electronic repair valas, so to say. Again, we have an entire market that repairs old furniture in Delhi. So you even have an economy of furniture here. So, I mean, none of us really recall throwing away a watch or a blender because it wasn't working. So if you look around, you look at the car mechanic, you look at the cobbler or the mochi, the tailor, the neighborhood person who's modifying your clothes because they're too big, they're too small, and all these are part of their economy. But I really want to point out that it isn't enough, and in fact, it's absolutely unacceptable to just sit back and gloat at the culture of repair in India, because Chintan's research has really shown us three challenges, and these are really the three M's, if you will. There's money, there's the master plan, and there's market. I'll start with the master plan really briefly. First of all, if you look around, all our actors, most of our actors in the repair sector are informal actors who have artisanal skills, whether it's somebody repairing your shoes or whether it's a tailor, and even things that are now called crafts, such as kantha, for example, has been an example of repair and reuse. So first of all of these people have no real space when you plan the space in your city. So you will find very often tailors, for example, sitting in corridors of markets. And we all have local markets, and they just have this little machine that's there, or a little table on which they'll accept your orders. And it's an informal arrangement. And they can't afford to rent. Rentals are expensive, and their business model won't allow them that kind of investment. You have cobblers. I mean, if you look around anywhere in India, it's quite rare to see a person like that, occupying a place where they're visible, where they're safe. So they're often sitting at tailpipe level, which actually makes them extremely vulnerable because they're breathing in tailpipe emissions from vehicular pollution. But more than that, they are literally sitting at the level of your feet. They're sitting on pieces of stone across nalas. They're sitting behind bus stops. They're hidden people by more. So when you have a master plan, then you really have to create in every locality a space which is safe above all, but also visible for the repair economy. And that really comes down to what zonal plans look like, what residential plans look like. And we're seeing this change in certain areas. For example, the parking fees in residential areas. So we are looking at regulation come down to, the most molecular level possible. But we're seeing it in other sectors and not in the repair economy, because we don't consider all the valas, the darzi and the mochi and all the people, important enough to put them on our master plan. So that also is very important, because then comes money. And the point about money really is that money is, when we did our survey, we interviewed large numbers of repair actors. And one of the things we found, and it's kind of a part of the wider conversation on credit in India, is that they all really wanted small sums, under 5 lakhs. And that is actually the hardest credit to get. And we really understand that while it might be hard for informal sector to be able to prove themselves credit worthy, it's also quite important if we are going to look at creating these kinds of solutions, then that involves creating a kind of ecosystem where there are not just loans but even grants. Because if you can give a grant to a non-profit to research repair economy, why can't an actor who's actually repairing and circulating materials in the economy be also given some kind of a little grant, and that's a question we should ask ourselves. But the most important thing, I think, is really access to market. And this is really complex because till now, we had really talked about how at many levels we have to talk about people wanting to repair things. I'd mentioned who throws away a watch or who throws away a blender. But that's really complex, because increasingly, as cities are changing very dramatically, you're looking at gated communities. And in a gated community, and you have entire cities that are, significantly gated. And, some of the newer cities, the newer parts of cities, whether it's Bangalore, whether it's Gurgaon, and that's kind of become a model. But when you create gated communities, you take away street life. And when you take away street life because you don't have a master plan for these people, you also make them lose their access to their potential clients. So it's more and more difficult for somebody to go find a cobbler if you live in this kind of a city, because the roads have been leached of life, because everything you need is now moved inwards of your gated community. And that is also quite exclusionary, because you have also left out the cobblers and the repair people, and they are kind of relegated to markets which are quite far away, which are considered old world markets. People don't go there very often, and consequently you kind of delink the skill and the market for that skill. So in many parts of the world also, they have these skilled artisans, and as we do too. And what comes to mind is an example of Patagonia. I thought of Patagonia because it's a well-known outdoor apparel firm. And Patagonia did this big thing across in 2016, and they've continued doing those tours where they go around in it's a traveling thing where you can take your Patagonia items to them and they'll repair it, whether the zipper of the jacket is spoiled or whatever it is. And they repaired about 2,000 items in 1 year. And to me, if companies are spending that kind of effort, LL Bean is another company that does a lot of that. Then I really ask that what kind of legislation do you need in a country like India, where you actually have already the skills? Those skills are accessible, but as the ecosystem changes, and it changes quite dramatically, both in terms of the kinds of cities that we're living in now today, which are increasingly gated communities. If you look at, or they're very sterile cities in terms of street life and access to these markets. And I would say that, first of all, we need to really broaden our scope of the extended producer responsibility in our legislation. At this point, it's applicable primarily to plastics and electronics, but it's quite important that it actually expands not only to include picking up old materials and recycling those materials, but also a significant amount of repair. And repair, and as Christina previously said, repair is not just a thing that you can do. It's not an operation that you undertake on a consumer good. Repair is also quite a thing that has to be made possible. You can't repair items which have just these very complex fused they're just stuck together and they're not grooved together, or they're not made for repair, or even worse, when those spare parts are so complicated and they're not available. And for example, you might, and then as part of the EPR, I would say that also make it affordable. There was a study that was done in Rhode Island Institute in the engineering department. One of the master students did that, and they found that if you took a car and you took it apart, and then you had to put it together again and buy all those spare parts, basically, it would be 20 times more expensive. And I think, especially for the automobile sector, I think we have to be quite mindful, because we're getting in very global models, not only of the vehicles themselves, but equally of how those vehicles are maintained, and especially higher end vehicles. And we will really need to have to consider how we need to make them affordable. In the automobile sector, there's been a huge backlash and a lot of friction with the informal sector about why the informal sector is taking these old, vehicles, dismantling them, taking these spare parts and using them to good effect very innovatively. And the informal sector says, well, we this is what we do. But the formal sector says, oh, well, you should only buy your spare parts from us. And there's no real reason for it. And in fact, the Competition Commission a few years ago fined several of them for making spare parts ridiculously expensive. So these are the kinds of trends that we don't notice, but they are there. And the automobile sector is only one sector. But we increasingly have things which cannot be repaired. So I think as we extend extended producer responsibility, we have to extend it in a very particular way. I think one of the ways that we should extend it is to make things repairable, which talks about design. And that can't be just done in India alone. That has to be global. A blender that you bought some years ago, and say something very new age like a NutriBullet. A NutriBullet is extremely difficult to repair because it's just designed quite differently, and it's designed as a unit that you kind of throw away when you don't use, or at least that has been my experience. But equally, if you look at how difficult it is increasingly for other things, if you look at textiles, for example, they're so much harder to work on. And I would say that then let's also look at what is the cost of repair. And that's where I think there's another crisis, because you have to have legislation that makes sure that it is still affordable. That's one of the things you see outside of India, is that people don't repair because it's extremely expensive to repair. And that's not the case in India, and we have to hold on to that part through regulation, rather than glorify that, oh, India has a great culture of frugality and reuse. That culture is very easy to wipe out if we don't protect it. I think also the manufacturers we have to expand the scope of the extended producer responsibility, where we're putting repair into it. So it's not just something about electronics. I think we really, really have to talk about automobiles. I think we have to talk about the big brand suitcases. I mean, if today your suitcase, the zipper of your suitcase gets spoiled, you just drag it to one of your local markets, and there's always someone sitting in a back lane who will somehow repair it for you. They might put something, in a purple suitcase, you might get, a dark brown chain, but you will get it repaired and you can go on using it rather than discard that entire piece of luggage. But I think when EPR comes in, and as EPR comes in for these kinds of things, then I would say that the formal sector, the manufacturers, the brands, really have to get into more innovative tie-ups with the informal sector. The informal sector tie-ups that we're talking about today cannot carry on in what we see at Chintan in a fairly exploitative way. You can't say that the repair economy is booming in India when the person sits illegally in the back lane in a very unhygienic way in your local market or behind the bus stop or whatever it is. So I think the onus is to improve workplace, to make goods more repairable at an affordable rate, to redesign for repair. And I think that is so non-negotiable, and it's a form of creating livelihoods in our country, green livelihoods. And I think we also have to find ways for informal sector to be part of this change with formal sector. And I'd like to draw here a comparison with the current EPR, for example, on plastics, where informal sector is actually collecting, low-grade plastics and giving those low-grade plastics to, for recycling, and the formal sector is putting in the money so that there's money to move that in the chain, and that is EPR, that is their responsibility, and that's registered, and that's how the law works. My point is that we should really look at how to improve the working of the informal sector, and formalize them or semi-formalize them, help them sit in better places. It is really, I think, high time that people who are manufacturing all of these products join advocates, whether it's Chintan or whether it's all these other organizations. And we have Mr. Bhardwaj here as well, and talk about what kind of master plan we want, influence the smart cities mission, which is absolutely cutting edge, and talk about how do you make a smart city that is inclusive, and even put some of these factors into the Swachh Bharat Sarvekshan, the annual survey, which talks about how do you encourage in your municipality this partnership with manufacturers and with repair workers, and how do you even before you have legislation, how do you kind of change that? And so I'm going to end that. I think my time is kind of done, but I will leave you with a thought about, if you have authorized dealers formally for your vehicles and for all kinds of your repairs of your water filters, then I think it's time to call to work with our informal sector and create an economy of authorized dealers for everything that can and in fact ought to be repaired. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bharti. That was it was great. You talked about the 3 M's. You talked about how smart cities require inclusion of an informal sector, and we should have a marriage between the informal sector and the formal sector, so that so that they are also inclusive and part of the whole change. And we can't just keep gloating over the fact, as you said, that we have a frugal. We keep talking about it, how frugal we are and how we repair. But if we are not careful, this entire repair sector and refurbishing sector might just vanish, because we have not been able to give them proper ways of proper spaces, given them space in the city, and we've kind of excluded them with our gated communities, with our sterile cities. So that was very interesting. We need to get our legislations in place so that the informal sector can be a big part of our whole inclusive smart city. So thank you so much, Bharti. I now invite our last panelist of the evening, Mr. Anil Bhardwaj, who's Secretary General of Federation of Indian Micro and Small and Medium Enterprises, New Delhi. After serving for almost a decade in the private sector and international trade, he moved on to take up the challenge of leading a national federation of SME sector. His specializations include industrial and trade policy issues and framework conditions of promotional and regulatory environment for SMEs, and market access issues of MSMEs, and at the regional trade agreements. I request Mr. Bhardwaj to share his perspective of using circular economy clusters in India, which are key to competitiveness, jobs, and sustainability. Over to you, Mr. Bhardwaj.
Thank you so much. And I say on this issue, the repair economy is an important part of circular economy discourse, and it makes both economic sense and is eminently sensible from the standpoint of view of sustainability. Repair economy is very much part of life in developing countries, and it is so deeply ingrained here in India, as Bharti has said, partly because repairing is not expensive and there is plenty of skilled people around, which makes repairing highly economical, and partly for MSMEs. Investing in new machines is not easy. Capital is scarce and they shun capital intensive acquisition. So And not long ago, for example, when all the industrial generators in India were refurbished generators that came out of the shipbreaking from Alang, from Gujarat. So in fact, what happens is people at top of the game would acquire new machines and sell old one to somebody down the chain who is more than willing to pay and use it. So there is an organized repair market for such machines in the MSME segment. Today, I seek your indulgence in allowing me to expand and develop and make a presentation as to how industrial clusters can be key to competitiveness, job creation, and sustainability, where repair is a subset of initiatives to achieve the objectives of circular economy. But before I do that, let me take you through very quickly with regards to how the MSME sector looks like in India. There are 60 million enterprises employing around 110 million people, and their contribution to GDP stands close to 30%. And they have 40% industrial production to contribute to, and the direct contribution to export is 35%, and if we include the indirect one also, it crosses 50%. But there are certain peculiar features about MSME sector in India, and I am telling that you here through the slide so that we can relate to the subsequent part of the presentation. 9% SMEs in India are proprietorship. So essentially, we're talking about is an informal sector. Less than 10% have access to institutional funds or, in practical sense, loans of any kind. 90% do not have, either they have not access, they could not get it, or they did not seek. Owned by women enterprises. Fortunately, almost enterprises are owned by scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, backward castes, and marginal. So to that extent, but what is interesting is that average employment per unit is less than 2. So essentially, they are self-employed people. The sector is also self-employed. Less than 10% work from authorized, approved industrial space. So most of them are working either from home or from the areas which are quote unquote unauthorized. In spite of these shortcomings and limitations, they are forced to reckon with in sectors like textile and garments, leather, gems and jewelry. Agriculture, and products used in economic sections of society, whether it is textile and garments or whether it is stuff used for cookery and that. Next, please. Samuel, would you change? Now, also, let me take you through about the geographical agglomeration and clusters and industrial areas and parks in India. See, there are more than 400 industrial clusters as per the UNIDO study that was carried out a little long ago, but more or less the number remains that these are major industrial clusters like Ludhiana and Tirupur. When we say industrial clusters, essentially here the significant part is that there has to be a value chain of same or similar product in a particular geographical location. And interestingly, 60% of MSME exports actually emanate from these clusters. Generally, these clusters have come over a period of time, and they could be typically called as organically grown clusters. At the same time, there are more than artisanal clusters. Some other part of art form, people are producing goods. At the same time, there are, if you look at the industrial areas and parks, as per the information available with the central government through the mapping of through the satellite wing, there are 3,373 industrial areas and parks covering 4,75,000 hectares. Generally, these parks are greenfield, although some could be organic clusters also, like some of the 400 clusters that I mentioned, because in some of these clusters, new industrial areas have been created, whether in Tirupur or in Coimbatore, in other areas, or in Faridabad. Newer industrial areas have been created, although there have been earlier existing big clusters. And industrial parks are generally sector product specific. These are of recent vintage, coming out in areas like textiles, food, leather, etc., in electronics. Next, please. Now, this is what I propose to you, that so far we have been discussing in clusters issues like energy efficiency or some kind of recycling, but we have not seen these clusters together in a more holistic manner. So the idea of this presentation is that if we look through the three vectors that are there, like the energy vector used in the cluster, the value addition vector, the recycling vector. And these three vectors are interconnected, interrelated. And for example, energy is used in different processes. Then in the value addition part, from raw material to intermediate products to finished products, there is a long chain that goes. And then, of course, there are a lot of waste also is produced, which could be recycled and used in these clusters. If these three things are taken together, then we can have substantial savings, and that could lead to competitiveness, job sustenance because you are competitive, job creation because you are creating new jobs through the recycling, you can say, industry, and the whole cluster becomes more sustainable, either both from the perspective of the economy, that is job creation, but as well as from the standpoint of view of use of raw material and products and services. Let me take you through all these three vectors little in detail. Next, please. So first, for example, take the energy vector. Different processes create or require energy in varied forms, and this could be kinetic energy or potential energy. The kinetic energy can take form of thermal, electrical, mechanical. So you have one industry, for example, that is creating thermal energy, but there could be another factory a couple of paces down the line which would be requiring thermal energy, but there is no connect between the two. So both, we are doubly wasting the energy. One, what is created is not used, and the other one, it has to create in order to use it. So is the case for potential energy like chemical, elastic, gravitational energies. So far, we have been focusing on energy efficiency and energy saving methods, and that too in electric thermal area. And we have not really explored that what different form of energies, for example, are being used, created, and could be harnessed by different economic actors within the cluster. So the new thing is that intra and interoperability of forms of energy in cluster units. Use of one form of energy available in one process industry that could be used by another process industry within the cluster. But in order to do that, what is needed is first a detailed energy mapping, two, technologies that may be required to harness it, and of course, investment may be required to get it going, to make it practical. Next, please. Similarly, we come to value addition vector. You can imagine, for example, a cycle cluster in Ludhiana. Now, from raw material to finished product, there are several processes that ultimately product has to go through, finally to be converted and into a bicycle. For example, perforated metal sheets, when you make the larger holes, still a lot of space is left in between. The same material is used for making the smaller holes in the same metal sheet and used for different purposes. Idea is that, can we see that how many such products or different forms of raw material or intermediate products could be utilized by different actors within the cluster. In order for this thing to really take it off, although something is happening already by the common sense and people are using it, but there are some problems. And problem is, first of all, of standard. For example, one person might be using a metal sheet of a particular thickness, and the other one might be using the thickness of different measure. But if we standardize sometimes, then it becomes very easy to minimize the waste, and the same material could be used across the value chain. Similar is the case for the need for standardization is tremendous in the cluster for large number of products, from nuts and bolts to sheets, etc. So standardization is an extremely important exercise that it is needed to be done if we look at the cluster holistically. So we need to do the mapping from perspective of reusing material in process. Secondly, a standardization methodology or standardization initiative, and some agency who can initially coordinate this. Next, please. And finally, we come to the third vector, that is the recycling vector, which I think everybody can quickly understand. But at the same time, so far, our efforts in recycling has been more on the energy side, solid waste management and converting them to energy. But India's industrial clusters, as a matter of fact, industrial clusters anywhere, are big producers of waste. And there's all kind of waste that we are producing: organic, paper, plastics, metal, e-waste, chemical, fabric, cellulosic, and mixed. And fortunately, good technologies, established technologies are easily available all across these sectors. But I think we have not been able to, first of all, I think there is some kind of information asymmetry. We don't know what is happening or what can be done with it. There's no coordination. So who's producing or who's coming, you can say, leaving the waste aside, doesn't know that how it could be collected and could be productively used. So what is needed here is also a detailed mapping of waste of the cluster, technologies and incentives to recycle it, and of course, investment that may be required through the fund. Fortunately, we have funds available. I'll come to that later. So these are three vectors I just tried to explain to you, that along these three vectors, we can, if we look at the cluster holistically, we can harness the energies that are there in these three vectors and convert them into gold. Next, please. So the way ahead, I think first of all, the gist of my presentation is that we need a new vision of a green or circular industrial clusters. We have large number of industrial clusters in India, 400 plus, and then industrial parks and so on. So, and the vision has to be has to walk on two legs. One is that where nothing is wasted and everything used productively. Whatever the cluster is producing could be used for one thing or another. And second, the whole initiative has to be grounded in a business case. You know, there is no philanthropy here, but you know, there has to be a business case, solid business case. Fortunately, in most of these areas, a business case is present. Second, we need an anchor institution in the cluster. Currently, what we have is industry association, industrial area level association. Msma, for example, has 740 member association. Many of them are from the clusters also. But most industry associations are weak and lack capacity to carry this activity. The district industry center as an institution that are there in most of the districts are also almost defunct and incapacitated. What should kind of a council with administrative and managerial powers, like to collect taxes and to carry these activities around, or industry association are capacitated through capacity building measures. And some such successful examples also exist, for example, in Coimbatore or in Tirupur or in Ahmedabad, in several other areas where industry associations have come forward, shown leadership, and have carried out such projects as we are mentioning. Or we think of a new model that also is emerging slowly. That whole activity of a cluster is outsourced to a private party through competitive bidding process. I mean, could be big, large consulting companies who can manage this on a fee management basis or a successful fee basis. Also, what we need to do is that there are a number of schemes available. Zero effect, zero defect. There is a number of schemes of Bureau of Energy Efficiency. We have cluster development program of Ministry of MSME and many other industrial parks schemes of textiles and leather and so on. Then there are green funds who are providing funds at a very economical rate and sometimes almost zero rate of interest. But we do need incentives for clusters which aspire to be green clusters, for industrial part for industries which could be part of green circle and accordingly incentivized by the importers or by the government as buyers, for investors which are ready to take risk in technologies and management. As a matter of fact, there is a new initiative with the help of ADB and Ministry of Commerce and Industry, which is now going for the rating of industrial parks in India. And very soon this new scheme is to be announced. A steering committee is made. I'm a member of that committee. So idea is that we will be needing to create such incentives so that new initiatives could be taken up. So this is what I wanted to share it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhardwaj, for very insightful perspectives on the requirement of a new vision for circular industrial clusters and parks where nothing is wasted and everything is used productively. As you said, these need to be grounded in business cases, like you cited the example of Coimbatore. So I think I'll end this, for gist of your presentation is that incentives are required. If clusters have to go green, then definitely incentives are required. So thank you so much, Mr. Bhardwaj. I'll now be taking a few questions from the audience. So over to you, Samuel.
Thank you so much to all the panelists for such a wonderful and insightful presentation. I would request each one of you to please switch on your videos and your microphones as well. I would be specifying questions to each panelist. So the first question which I have is for Ms. Christina Martin. This has been asked by Ms. Mamta Jain, who is the founder of Sampotion. She asks two questions. The first question from her side is, do you know of any venture working on a post-industrial waste in textile value chain, that is working with textile scraps?
So it's not specified. Do you mean to venture that is located in Europe?
Yeah, I believe the question pertains to Europe.
Yeah, so in most cases, the textiles that are consumed here in Europe, they are mostly produced in Asian countries. So therefore, all the waste and all the textile scraps are then left also in the countries where they're produced. That's why here in Europe, no, currently we do not have, not that I know of, companies who work with post-industrial textile waste. But currently, we have a very big problem with the post-consumer textiles because the amounts of post-consumer textile waste is increasing each year due to fast fashion and very wasteful consumption patterns. And therefore, just in 4 years, all textile waste in Europe it's mandatory to collect it separately from all of other waste streams. And it is a big question, what is going to happen with all that's collected textile waste? And there's currently a lot of investments into and developments of recycling technologies going on, but not that much of commercial, readily available technologies are currently developed at a early stage in Europe. So let's see what will happen in the future.
Right, and the second question, which is asked by her is, has Europe inculcated repair economy at an elementary education level?
No, not in that formal way. No, we don't have like repair economy at education in schools, but schools have a lot of our schools are quite independent, so schools can design their education. Some of it, they have some flexibility when designing what particular education things they give to students. And for example, at my sister's schools, they indeed have redesign of textiles and upcycling of textiles. So that's a new thing. So hopefully there will be more schools implementing these kinds of things.
So the second question and the last question for you, Ms. Christina, has been asked by Mr. Pradeep Saha, who is the Director of Damage Control. He asks, how can you force manufacturers in a free market under IPR regime to have repairable products and make spare parts freely available?
I'm not sure if I can give like a precise answer on how can you force them make the parts freely available, but I can comment on the right to repair legislation that is now prepared by European Commission. And as I understood, the way they're working on it is that they're incentivizing the businesses to produce products that are would last a longer time, not just during the warranty period. And also like the spare parts for the product should be available for 10 years. For the moment it has produced, for 10 years, there should be available spare parts, but these parts, as I understand, are not available for everyone, but it is sort of a way for those businesses, they can also change their business models and add also maintenance and repair to their business models. So they will still have their products, but they need to provide the service for the repair, or have like subcontractors who will then provide the services.
All right, thank you for the answers. My next set of questions are addressed to Ms. Bharti Chaturvedi. So the question has been addressed by Mr. Aditya B. He asks, are there local collectives or unions of repair persons in India which would kind of give power to them and will be able to represent their interests?
So they have traditional organizations. Many of these occupations have, they emerge out of a long business of caste-based organizations. And as you know, traditionally, unions or associations of caste are banded under the term of Samaj. So you do have Samajas of mochis and other people. But in the absence of, state-based regulation and state-based inclusion, there's a limitation on all of these. So that is one thing. I do want to take this chance, though, to say that we are hoping to organize them more and more. And let's see where that goes. But just organizing our work with waste workers has shown that just organizing without also influencing the regulatory and the legislation landscape and ecosystem actually doesn't really transform. So you have to do both if you want genuine transformation of both how materials circulate and how poverty, in fact, you can fight poverty and create some of these entrepreneurs in this context. But finally, just to chip into what, Christina said, about businesses. I found it very interesting. LL Bean, many of you might know LL Bean. They make all these outdoor things, canoes and equipment and boots and hiking boots and the usual stuff. And one of their representatives some years ago was telling me that they set up a repair, a repair part of their business. And he said that that people were coming back, and I met one of the persons who'd sent back his jacket after 23 years because for some reason that jacket was still being used, and he said, the zipper had conked out, and I thought, I use this, so I sent it back. And the LL Bean representative said that it was that basically it was they had this whole way of doing this, but it was very important as part of their core business. It was a USP, it gave them client loyalty, and it kind of also gave them data on how their materials were being used, what was being long lasting, and all of that.
Right, thank you for that. The next question has been asked by Ms. Mamta Jain again. So she has given a situation where she says that during her bid to sell her repair DIY activities for the school segment, she figured out that nobody wants to learn the DIY repair activities, but instead the schools are only interested in teaching technology and robotics. Ms. Bharti, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, I appreciate people learning to repair their own things, but I think in the Indian context, I would say, why don't I would rather, have my children learn, and not just my children, but the younger generation learn, that there is a whole world out there that repairs, and you need to be able to give your things for repairing, and you need to look at the imperfections and the artisanal qualities both of repair and embrace it, and stand up for these service providers. You're very excited as a young person, with certain kinds of people. You say that, I really, somebody, with organic food and things like that and alternatives to plastics, but you're less excited by, the more vernacular brand of environmentalism, which is the repair economy and repair workers. And I would rather have, younger generation people have their eyes open to this reality and find ways to support this as clients and as voice.
Right. My final question to you is, what are your experiences with the formal EPR players in the e-waste and plastic waste sectors? Mr. Pradeep Dadlani, who has asked this question, says that in his limited experience, it's just that they take it as a compliance issue and try to complete the requisite documentation for the respective SPCB and are not very transparent and forthcoming on the same. What are your opinions?
I think it is a compliance issue, and I think that obviously, there's my grinning and complying, so to say. But I would really look forward to expanding EPR, because I think you can't have a circular economy, or for that matter, any kind of sustainability, if our legislation stops at collection and recycling. Because recycling, really, we have to really look at repair. And yes, I appreciate that there's plastic everywhere. You go to the Himalayas, there's plastics, and my colleagues, Chitra Mukherjee and Ira Sahai. Ira has been running these huge projects that we do in Uttaranchal, where she's finding multi-layered packaging everywhere, and her model is completely different from an urban model. But I do think that while we address, and I see no harm if people just want to look at it as compliance and not get excited about it. I'm just hoping that more and more people will bother to comply. And I think the state pollution control boards, as we see across the board, they absolutely don't have the capacity and the manpower and all of that to implement EPR as far as the compliance and the picking up goes. But finally, I will certainly say that EPR has to expand to include repair in India. And it has to be, and I look forward to a compliance of that kind of expanded scope. I'm comfortable if people don't put their hearts into it and just put their money and their efficiencies into complying by a legislation. That's my understanding.
Thank you for the answers, ma'am. My next set of questions are addressed to Mr. Anil Bhardwaj. The first question is, which has been asked by Mr. Varun Gupta. How do the profit-making mentality of manufacturers change to a sustainable one if the price competition is so high in India, with reference to the MSME sector?
I think it could be influenced with the help of right incentives. It's both carrot and stick. So we need legislation that can influence people changing their buying behavior, and incentives also to influence that. And through that, I think we would be able to do it. But the problem is of governance in India, and we have rather weak state capacity to enforce laws. We have some very strict laws. We have seen that in plastics, for example, it has been banned, but still rampant use of plastics is there. If you go to particularly B class cities or C class cities. So I think it's both carrot and stick through the incentives and enforcement that it could be changed.
Right. The next question asked by Ms. Mamta Jain is, what is happening in terms of government policies with respect to EPR in general, and specifically in terms of sustainable fashion? You talked about places like Ludhiana, Tirupur. They have a huge industry in terms of clothing. So what are your thoughts on that? Mr. Bhardwaj, am I audible?
Couldn't get right. I mean, you're not audible. If you could kindly repeat that. If you could please repeat it.
Yes, I would like to repeat my question. So Ms. Mamta Jain asks, what is happening in terms of government policies with respect to EPR in general and also specifically for the sustainable fashion industry?
What I got was the about EPR. The second part again I missed. I'm sorry. So let me comment on the EPR. See, it is a relatively new concept in India, and it started, as you know, with car batteries, lead acid batteries, and that market is now established. But it is increasingly now moving to plastics and particularly electronics. Electronics is going to be the major industry which is going to be affected. But again, I again say the same thing, that we'll have to increase the capacity of the state to enforce the regulations that we make. If we do not have you can say adequate capacity to enforce laws, what happens is that it creates a perverse incentive for people who can defy the law. So they can make money by defying the law, and people who are observing the law or complying the law are faced to bear additional expenses, and they might not survive. So we create a very unfortunate situation that way, that those companies might survive that are defying the law, and that companies that are doing good are actually folded. So are folded. So one of the major concern in this discourse is weak capacity of the state, either because of the willingness or because they don't want to invest enough resources, both in terms of money as well as human resources, to improve compliance. Second part of the question again, so I'm sorry to answer that.
Yeah, the second part of the question was specifically addressed to the sustainable fashion industry. This question is specific to those industrial clusters which are present in industrial towns like Ludhiana, Tirupur, where there's a huge amount of environmental impact caused. Hello, was my question audible?
In Tirupur, for example, Supreme Court had to come down very heavily, and they forced closure leather industry also near Kanpur. So I think it is important that leather industry takes cognizance of the fact or the need of complying with the laws of related to environment, and work really hard towards. Unfortunately, that is not happening, and part of the reason that there is no one single agency that can coordinate the efforts of different actors that are there. For example, in Tirupur, you could have several people. You have garment stitchers, then you have dyers, you have pressers, and there may be 10 or 12 such different producer groups. The bigger problem is how to coordinate between these groups. So that's why we need some kind of an anchor institution that can collect them together and orient them towards a more sustainable, you can say, working or functioning of the cluster. I think that is needed, and that's why in my last slide I had said that we needing some kind of a regulation as well as set of incentives so that such institutions can come up.
Right. So I have one question which is open to the panel. This question has been asked by Mr. Ram Charitra Sa from Kathmandu, Nepal. He says that products like toys, which are made out of recycling material, are found to be highly contaminated with EBDE or OBDE, POPs, chemicals which are harmful for children. So he says that not everything should be recycled in the name of circular economy. So how can we address these kind of issues in the circular economy framework? I would address this
Can
question
I take
to the
that?
panel. Yes, please.
So I think a very important part of the circular economy is actually cleaning out materials, which means that we have to really stop, or we have to regulate additives out of, whether we're looking at plastics, whether we're looking at dyes, whether we're looking at coloring agents. And I think that kind of goes without saying, because you want to circulate a material, you don't want to circulate toxics. In fact, one of the challenges we have today, and many of you are in, Kathmandu and India and places like that, is the air pollution. And what is air pollution except circulation of toxic materials eventually? So I think it goes without saying, and I think it's a really important point that you've brought up, that a part of both the repair as well as the circular economy, and they're part of the same thing, has to be about removing toxicity from materials and regulating that. Unfortunately, in the developing world, the regulation can be quite low, especially because a lot of the manufacturing, is not, a lot of toxins are not regulated. Manufacturing, if it's informal, we always have the challenge of what's coming in from China. So we acknowledge these crises, but for sure that the additives and all have to, basically you have to learn to manufacture without the same kinds of constituents. And I think you can see many of these materials now. You don't have brightly colored toys for children because that has lead. So we really have to learn to manufacture differently and with less additives. You also have to look at a labeling kind of regime. So, and we have to find disincentives for that. I think that's something that is part and parcel of that circular economy game.
Anything which the other panelists would like to add?
I think one issue also here is about affordability and availability of cheaper material coming in, particularly from countries like China, which is almost unregulated or has been unregulated for quite some time in terms of quality of material. So I think we need to work on both the fronts. One is informing people about the harms, and secondly, on improving enforcement of standards at our borders. Once we do that, I think then the problem would be largely addressed.
Right. Thank you so much. Anything you would like to add, Ms. Christina, or can I move to the next question?
I'll shortly add. I think it is a very important question, because often when we talk about circular economy, the topic about the chemicals, toxic chemicals that used to produce, is somehow left in the background. So it is definitely the question that should be addressed. So I understood that there is a mention of toys, and when you recycle them, then the toys may have some kind of plastics that are toxic, right? So sadly, many new toys that are on the market also may have toxic plastics, or some kind of toxic materials in them. We just don't know. And in the development countries, there are different organizations that deal with it and try to sort out those from the market. So, but I think it's of course the system is not perfect, and if we start to recycle everything, we need to know what exactly we're recycling. So to also reflect what Ms. Bharati said, that there should be better labeling, and maybe at some point also needed certification. For example, when you talk about textiles, when you purchase a new textile item, you don't know what kind of chemicals it was used to give it this color. And when you recycle, usually you put quite often all the textiles you have in one pot and see what comes out. But now we have on the markets eco-certified textiles. Maybe if we have more eco-certified products and we somehow sort them or collect them separately from everything else, maybe then we can also start to developing, but very specifically for recycle different waste streams. But that, of course, is a new challenge, and definitely a very expensive one, because it's really required the different technologies for all those products.
Right. So my last question to the whole panel today is, asked by Mr. Anuj. He says, we definitely agree with the need for incentives as well as disincentives. However, even in the absence of these, if there is indeed value being lost that can be regained by implementing circular or repair economies, what are some of the reasons that the market is unable to fulfill this and organizations are not already profiting off this opportunity? I open this question to the whole panel.
So, if I may just
Yes,
say,
please.
I'm a bit confused about the question, if you don't mind, Anuj, because I think the fact that people are doing all this work and earning a livelihood, whether you're looking at, my favorite, I'm from Delhi and I tend to use examples in the repair economy from around myself, whether you look at Amar Colony or whether you look at Wonder Tailors, where both of which I patronize, and many of us do. But everywhere, people earn a living and they educate their children, they feed themselves, they go through life. So it's not that they're not making a profit. Of course, they're not making as much money as they should, but they're making it under circumstances which should definitely be dramatically improved. And they also could go and work more professionally, particularly more safely, if there was an ecosystem that helped them. And, I think after, watching Mr. Bhardwaj's presentation, I think there is a lot of potential for that. So I'm just saying, I don't know how people are not earning. They're doing this work. There's a lot of reuse and recycling. I think we tend not to document it, and therefore we underestimate it.
Right. Anything else, Mr. Other panelists would like?
I agree with what Bhartiji has said.
Well, I can maybe comment on why, for example, aren't the big businesses, the really big global corporation, maybe at least here in Europe, profiting on that. Well, often is that the things that we here consume are produced in Asia. So when they are imported here, so actually then the proper know-how and how everything is assembled is located somewhere else geographically. So now we have developed it here. The other thing is of course, is the labor costs. Of course, that is sometimes it's just so expensive for stuff to be repaired here, that it has to be incentivized by the policies. For example, in Sweden, for repair, there are tax reductions so that people could actually do businesses through repairing things. And also for the business perspective is what's they care is to show high revenue very often, and the revenue will be much higher on your papers if you produce and sell new things rather than your repair. So we really need to have a shift in mindset from the entrepreneurs on how they perceive of value creation. And I think the change is undergoing in the younger entrepreneurs, who also see the value not of the increasing revenue, but also on everything, other valuable things like the culture of repair, which we see through repair cafes and that kind of thing. So thank you.
Right, I thank you all the panelists, and I'll hand it over to Ms. Chitra.
Thank you, Samuel. I'd like to wrap the event here by again thanking our fantastic panel and the wonderful discussions we've had, by all the questions that have come from the audience. It's been most interesting. Thank you for investing your time with us this evening. I would just like to remind you that we have 3 more upcoming webinars to continue our discussion on circular economy. And the details will be, of course, posted as usual on our social media, so keep following that. The next one we have is on 9th of November, which is a Monday, and we'll discuss the plastic challenge in the era of circular economy. So please do join us for more interesting discussions. Thank you again and have a great evening. Thank you so much.